As the weekend shootings dominate the media and political narrative, we're seeing what we always do in these cases, which is a frequent talking point emerge. This time it's that there have been more mass shootings than days in the United States in 2019. Can you believe it's happening more than once a day? Why are we putting up with this every day? Many outlets are asking.
There have been more mass shootings in the U.S. than days this year.
If this gives you flashbacks to another talking point post-Parkland last year, they are pretty similar. Remember back then they were saying, oh, that's the 17th school shooting in just 45 days this year. We're having a school shooting every 3 days. And that sounds a little off. Because it is. You dig into the data, and they're counting things like an accidental discharge at a police academy where nobody got hurt, and a suicide at an abandoned school where there were no students or teachers present. They're counting these cases that clearly are not school shootings in any common understanding of the term, just grasps at straws to build a political narrative rather than report the truth to you. I did a video on that claim at the time, and I caught some flack from people saying, well, why do you care about the number? Are you saying that 5 or 10 school shootings during the year is okay? No, I'm saying that the integrity of the information reported to you matters. I have a perspective on this issue. Yes, I believe in a fundamental right to self-defense, and I believe that right constitutionally shall not be infringed. But I also believe in having the best information available so that you can make that sort of decision for yourself. And again, this particular narrative is not that. So I dug into the data source these media outlets are citing, expecting to see what I saw last time around, some agenda-driven advocacy organization, but in all fairness, it doesn't look like this one is quite as bad as the last. They're called the Gun Violence Archive. They claim no affiliation with any advocacy organization. I don't see any policy advocacy on their website at all, in fact. And according to their mission statement, they just exist to provide gun-related violence information to the public as comprehensively as possible. And I will say their data quality is comparatively good to other sources I've seen. Wherever they're reporting aggregate numbers, they itemize those numbers out so you can look at each individual case and see news stories or other information to back up how they counted their numbers. We can disagree or dispute how that counting is done, but it's always appreciated when they at least show you, so you can judge for yourself whether you think the measure is a good one or not. The first and obvious question in this case, then, is what is a mass shooting? Media outlets are reporting 255 of them this year using this source. So what is this source's definition? Their definition is 4 or more shot or killed in a single incident at the same general time and location, excluding the shooter. And I did some vetting on what they mean by injured. Do they mean someone actually shot? Or do they mean some guy sprained his ankle running away and he's the 4th, so now this case is a mass shooting? I don't see a definition on their website, but based on incident evaluation, it looks like they keep the injury total tightly limited to actual shooting injuries. For example, this database reports only 2 injuries at the Thousand Oaks shooting in California last fall. We know from media reports that 18 or so were injured in the frenzy to escape, but this source is not counting those as shooting injuries for the purpose of defining mass shooting. Now, of course, there might be other components of a mass shooting that you may want to include in a satisfactory definition. Maybe this one is still too broad or too general. We'll get to that in a moment. But for now, at least we have a definition based on actual shooting deaths and injuries that we can work with. It's not that the media are outright lying in this case. Based on that definition, the numbers are generally correct. It's that a deeper dive into the numbers gets you a lot more information that is crucial to understanding the full picture. The narrative they're crafting focuses only on that one number and misleads by omitting a lot of important detailed information. The first of which is the basis for comparison. They go with this more shootings than days line because it sticks emotionally. More than one a day? Well, that's just crazy. As though one every other day is sane, or as though one every week is sane. The point is we just don't know because we don't have that basis for comparison. So using this definition for mass shooting, is the number increasing? Is it decreasing? Is it staying the same? While it is true that 2019 is on pace for a comparatively high year, data for the year-to-date cover only a little over half of it, so any speculation about the year-end numbers is exactly that. It's speculation. If we look at the data for the last 5 complete years from the same data source using the same mass shooting definition, there is no alarming increase to report, whether you cut the data by mass shooting incidents, by mass shooting deaths, or by mass shooting victims on a per capita basis. In fact, by many measures, we've had consecutive years of decreases. And again, that's not to say that these numbers are just fine. They're not. We'd all like to see less of this. It's only to say that giving the impression that there's some sort of spike is just contrary to what the data say, and we'll see how 2019 pans out. Until the end of the year, we can't really accurately judge 2019. Because we just don't have all the data yet. The next issue with the reporting is without the definition of mass shooting given to you, you're left to assume that each of these cases looked something like what we've recently seen in Gilroy, El Paso, or Dayton. Some gunman shooting random people indiscriminately with some big scary assault weapon. But that's just not the case. When we think of mass shooting, we often think of those secondary pieces of the definition beyond the body count, shooting random people in a public place. But a huge chunk of the data in this set are not that. By my count, 47 of their 255 2019 mass shootings are classified by this organization, not by me, but by them, as domestic violence, gang-related, drug-related, a home invasion, a workplace shooting, or some other case where there's a specific target in a private place. That's roughly a fifth of all of the incidents having a specific target flagged. And in fact, when you look at how many victims each case has, more than half of the cases are only the minimum threshold of 4, again, because so many of these cases are targeted in their violence, not indiscriminate in the way we often think of a mass shooting. This critical piece of the story is also observable when you look at where these reported mass shootings are happening. Urban center gang strongholds, Chicago, Baltimore, Philadelphia, DC, St. Louis, the list goes on. These are often criminals targeting other criminals for specific reasons, not randomly shooting up a Walmart. These shootings aren't happening in my neck of the woods, where people, cows, and AR-15s are running neck and neck for the biggest number in the census data, which brings us to our next point of obfuscation. The idea that these 255 so-called mass shootings for the year look anything like the recent ones in terms of weapon choice.
Last week, we had 4 incidents across this country where people with rifles walked in, assault weapons, and killed lots of people for different reasons. We can't have a garlic festival or a kindergarten classroom in Connecticut where we're not thinking of who's going to walk in with extended magazines with over 30 rounds and a rifle meant for combat.
This organization does actually flag its data for the use of so-called assault weapons, ARs, AKs, or anything else fitting the former federal definition or the definition in the jurisdiction of the incident. And out of these 255 cases, including the recent incidents in Gilroy, El Paso, and Dayton, 11 used a so-called assault weapon. That is 4% of the total cases in this mass shooting figure they're reporting, and 10% of the total victims. And complicating this assault weapon narrative even more, 3 of these cases happened in California, where assault weapons are already banned, at least in their high-capacity magazine configuration, to no avail in stopping these shootings. In fact, if you look at the top cities and states where these events are happening, the worst places already have assault weapons and red flag laws on the books. These places aren't alleviating the mass shooting number, they're driving it. And there was one other thing I noticed when examining the assault weapons data, and that's one specific case out of Houston where a homeowner used an AK-47 style rifle to defend his home against intruders.
3 men are dead and 1 is hurt after breaking into a home. 4 men forced their way into the home. The homeowner grabbed a gun and shot all 4 suspects.
So we're counting that as an assault weapon mass shooting. You can bring down my prior numbers about assault weapons a few ticks. And after digging a bit more, you can bring down the overall number a few ticks as well, because there are 3 cases in their 2019 mass shooting data that are actually classified as self-defense, which had me poking around on the website a little bit more. If they're flagging some mass shootings as self-defense, are they tracking defensive use of firearms generally? Indeed they are, and this is the last and most important media omission you will get regarding this organization and their data sets. The report from this organization that the media will never tell you about is this one, defensive use. Unless I'm missing where the rest of the data are, they've only recently started tracking this, dating back to April 23rd, so we're looking at a limited data set. But it still gives us some basis for comparison. There are 104 days of data here, and they have not 255, but 500 cases of firearms used in self-defense. So even if we accept this more mass shootings than days in 2019 narrative, The same data source tells us there are nearly 5 defensive gun uses every day. In other words, defensive gun use far outpaces mass shootings according to the same data we use, but we're not going to report that part to you. And this figure even uses a strict definition. The Gun Violence Archive counts the defensive case if there is use of force with a firearm to protect self or family. How many more cases are deterred simply by showing oneself to be armed, not necessarily even using force? Uncountable. A 2013 CDC study concluded those cases range from at least 500,000 to as high as 3 million annually, and those are 2008 numbers. One would presume they are now higher, which is exactly why I don't favor proposals to deny law-abiding citizens their rights. I don't favor proposals to diminish due process while we deny them their rights. I don't favor proposals that make it harder for the millions of good people in this country to defend themselves from the few hundred people who wish to do mass harm. Agree with me or not, I know not everyone does, I read the emails, but let's at least agree on this. Our decisions are best made based on comprehensive information, not one-sided information. I'm not asking you to ignore the mass shooting numbers, they're right there for you to evaluate, but we have a media that is asking you to ignore the other side of that coin, the cases that were minimized or prevented in self-defense. If it's strictly a numbers game, if it's strictly a how many cases per day argument, they're not being honest with you. By the numbers in their own sources, it is good defeating evil with firearms. It is not evil harming good by a wide margin. And if we follow their policy recommendations, I sincerely worry how many of these self-defense cases will migrate right over to that mass shooting data set they're so worked up about. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel always. Appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Twitter, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.